They called it an evaluation. 3 underfed military canines, no protective gear, no handler in sight, no fallback plan. And her, she wasn't even given a name. They pushed her through the gate and laughed like it was entertainment. Let the dogs finish her. But the instant the first animal advanced, snarling low, circling, fangs flashing, something shifted. No command. No signal. The tension evaporated, the snarls died out. And within a minute, the same animals trained to tear flesh were sitting calmly at her boots, as if they'd been waiting for her all along. Because she wasn't an outsider. She wasn't a placeholder. She wasn't a liability. She was Lieutenant Mara Cross, the seal they assumed they could shatter. And that morning, she didn't just clear the evaluation. She dismantled the entire program behind it. So before we show you how one Navy SEAL neutralized 3 combat-trained dogs without a leash, a word or a single gesture, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Then tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this story isn't about dominance. It's about understanding and what happens when the pack recognizes its true leader. By 0630, the wind coming off the water cut sharp, carrying traces of salt and diesel across the far edge of the installation. A neglected training annex clung to a bluff overlooking the bay, isolated from the main naval base by cracked asphalt, fencing, and rusted chain link bleached by years of coastal exposure. This wasn't where careers were built. It was where they quietly ended. A plain white SUV rolled to a stop outside the gate, engine clicking as it cooled. The woman who stepped out wasn't in standard issue, just tan field pants, a black performance shirt with sleeves rolled to the forearms, and worn brown tactical boots that had seen real terrain. No patches, no rank. No name strip. Just a black cap pulled low over dark hair and a clipped badge marked Temporary Clearance Naval Special Warfare. She moved like someone who didn't require context. Near the kennel yard, 2 men leaned against a warped shipping container, cigarettes glowing in the early light. One was massive, the kind of presence that filled space without effort. A SEAL trident sat on his collar and a grin sat permanently on his face. He elbowed the other man and spoke loud enough for her to hear. "That's who they sent," he scoffed. "Hope she brought a miracle or a body bag." The second man snorted. "Dogs'll handle it," he muttered, nodding toward the runs behind them. 3 high-drive Belgian Malinois stalked back and forth behind the fencing, muscles tight, energy coiled. Anyone who knew the breed could see it immediately. They were wound too tight, underworked, unstable. She didn't respond. She opened the rear of the SUV and removed a single hard-shell Pelican case, unmarked, utilitarian. Carrying it easily in one hand, she walked past the men without slowing, offering no eye contact, no reaction. By the time she reached the admin's shack, a third figure was waiting. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Holt, K-9 supervisor for the annex. Early 40s, sun-darkened skin, eyes narrowed from years of suspicion more than sunlight. He didn't extend a hand. "You're early," he said flatly. "I'm on schedule," she replied. Holt studied her like equipment that didn't belong in his inventory. "You're observing only, no interaction. No input unless requested. This isn't your operation, it's a favor from command. Someone higher up got nervous." She nodded once. Holt gestured toward the perimeter. "Stay clear of the yard. You want anything, it goes through me." She stepped aside, set the case near the fence, and stood still, weight centered, hands relaxed. One of the dogs, the largest of the 3, had stopped pacing. Its eyes were fixed on her. Holt noticed and tightened his jaw. "Those animals don't tolerate civilians," he said. "They sense doubt." "I don't project doubt," she answered, his lips twitched. "We'll see. Out here, resumes don't matter. The dogs decide." By 0700, the yard was alive. Gates slammed, boots echoed on concrete, a handler shouted for equipment behind the shack. The dogs answered with sharp, frantic barking that rattled the fencing, sound born of frustration and unused energy. She remained where she was, just beyond the enclosure, notebook unopened, hands tucked in her pockets. No sunglasses, no distractions, just watching. Holt had meant it when he said observe only. She was expected to file a report at week's end and otherwise fade into the background. Invisible. That suited her just fine. The handlers rotated through drills with mechanical accuracy. Heel out, disengage, recall, pursuit, clamp, release, reset. A handful of dogs executed cleanly. Most stumbled. One young male, all ribs and nerves, broke position during a vehicle search. His handler snapped the leash so hard the dog's front paws left the ground, then shouted a correction that echoed across the yard. The dog cried out, not from pain but uncertainty. Laughter rippled through the observers. Near the fence, someone muttered, "Females always crack first, dogs too." She didn't react, didn't write a word, but her gaze stayed fixed on the dog long after everyone else looked away. It happened again during the bite sleeve drill. Another Malinois, older, heavier, was sent in cold, no warm-up, straight at a standing decoy. The dog slowed at the last second, failed to commit, froze. The handler swore, spun, and flung the sleeve across the concrete in frustration. The dog dropped low, shoulders tight, eyes locked, not on the handler, not on the decoy, but on her. That made two. By midday, she had counted 5 dogs turning to her during moments of confusion or pressure. They weren't challenging her. They were checking her, as if something about her stance, her stillness. Her presence made more sense than the men yelling at the ends of leashes. No one noticed. No one except the biggest one, the tan brute they called Titan. Nearly 90 pounds of coiled force and barely restrained aggression. He hadn't been worked once that morning. Every time she paced the fence line, his eyes followed, not hunting, not hostile, curious. A junior handler, broad, cocky, wandered over, sipping from a hydration tube. "You look tense," he said lightly, nodding toward the dog. "Titan can smell it." "They all can. Animals don't lie." She turned just enough to meet his stare. "You're right," she said evenly. "They don't." The junior hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the yard. "Let's give our visitor something worth observing," said Commander Hale, striding in with 2 senior handlers beside him. "We've got a small pressure exercise that might clear up a few assumptions." He smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. A few men laughed, and she knew exactly where this was heading. It moved quickly, but not so fast she couldn't track every step. By 14:30, most of the junior staff had been dismissed. A cluster of senior handlers lingered near the kennels. Hale stood at the center, arms crossed, posture relaxed in the way men get right before things turn sharp. He gestured across the concrete. "If you're here to observe, you might as well see something real." The word real landed like a dare. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just listened. Hale nodded to another man, Granger, former Marine, loud, smiling too easily. "Got a test," Granger said. "Not official, but respected, older than the manuals." He jerked a thumb toward the far end of the yard. "Used to run it back when operators handled their own dogs before everything got softened up." A few chuckles followed. 3 dogs, he went on. "High drive, combat cleared. You step into the pen, no leash, no commands, no gear. You hold posture, stay calm, walk out clean, you pass." She looked at him, expression unreadable. "And if I don't," his grin widened, "then you get moved, stateside, maybe desk review. I hear compliance teams are always hiring." Hale stepped closer, voice lower now. "No one's making you do this. It's tradition. A culture check. Show the team you're not here because someone upstairs owed you a favor." She turned slightly, eyes scanning the kennel cards clipped to the gate. 3 names, Cairo, Ash, and Vale. All Belgian Malinois. All flagged for bite work, aggression assessment, dietary adjustment, urgent feed pending. They hadn't eaten in over 36 hours. Her voice was calm, exact. "Who's documenting this evolution?" Hale stared at her. "Any video, safety officer, veterinary standby." Silence. Then laughter. Stanton made a performance of sliding his phone from his pocket. "Relax," he said lightly. "I'll grab the footage. That should count." "Yeah." She didn't answer, just let out a slow breath through her nose, steady and controlled. Then she spoke. "All right." A pause. "I'll do it." Silence followed, not approval, not awe, just confusion. She hadn't pushed back, hadn't negotiated, hadn't asked for terms. She accepted it as if the decision had already been made. Stanton's grin slipped just briefly. Marshal Cole's jaw tightened. They hadn't prepared for agreement. But she already understood the rules, not the printed ones. The real ones. The kind carved into bodies and erased resumes. The kind murmured behind closed doors where no cameras roll. She followed them toward the holding enclosure. Beyond the fence, the dogs were already there, circling, restless, intent, watching her with that unsettling animal focus. Not searching for fear, searching for something familiar they couldn't name. The enclosure was a perfect square, 20 feet by 20, bordered by heavy 12-gauge chain link and anchored by thick steel posts at every corner. No barriers, no cover, nothing to use. Just a dented stainless steel water trough, half drained, and 3 empty feeding bowls scattered near one wall. She waited outside the gate as the dogs were brought in, one at a time. Rex came first, long-framed, 85 pounds of coiled tension, eyes locked forward, unblinking. Ash followed, broad-chested, pale markings along his ribs, an old scar cutting across his snout from a previous mauling. Then Milo, the youngest and the most volatile, infamous for broken tracking lines and sudden turns, twitching with nervous energy, scanning for something to strike. By the time the gate clanged shut, all 3 were free. No handlers, no backup, just her. A padlock snapped closed on the outer latch. Marshal Cole forced a thin smile and shouted through the fencing, 5 minutes. Walk out intact, and maybe we'll let you write that little report of yours. No one laughed. The sun hung low now, bleeding gold across the yard. Everything else had gone quiet. The only sounds were claws scraping concrete and the dogs breathing, quick, shallow, eager. She stayed still. Her weight was balanced over her boots, knees flexed, arms loose, fingers gently curved but calm. The dogs separated instinctively, one ahead, one drifting left, the third circling wide behind her. Not a unit, not coordinated. A fractured pack testing angles. Studying her not as a single threat, but as 3 minds responding to hunger, agitation, and provoked instinct, Rex growled first. Not a snarl, not a trigger. Just a low vibration that hummed between them. She didn't react, didn't speak, didn't meet his eyes. Dogs noticed everything, stance, breath, tension beneath skin. She knew not to challenge, she knew not to yield, instead she turned. Slow, fluid, just enough to keep them in view. Her pulse thudded harder than she liked, but she reined it in, syncing her breathing to the rhythm of the growl. Outside the fence, the men watched. Some leaned forward, eager. Others folded their arms, discomfort creeping in. Stanton muttered, "What's she waiting for? They're going to tear her apart." Then it happened. Rex surged forward, not a full attack, just a probing lunge. Teeth flashed, head dipped. She eased 1 foot back, lowering her center by a fraction. No aggression, just acknowledgement. Ash echoed the movement behind her, padding closer, gauging whether she'd flinch. She didn't. Then, without haste, she dropped to 1 knee, controlled, deliberate. Palms open on her thighs. Head angled slightly away, exposing the side of her neck. A wordless message, "I see you. I'm not a threat. I'm not food." 5 long seconds passed. Then Rex did the unthinkable. The growl faded. He leaned in, sniffed the air, and stepped forward just once. Carefully. Hawkins muttered a curse under his breath. Vex and Orion held their ground, no longer aggressive but wary. The woman didn't flinch, didn't reach toward them. She stayed kneeling, motionless, waiting. Something inside the enclosure had shifted. Not because she asserted dominance. She didn't. But because she never tried. She understood the signals they were actually listening for, the ones the men beyond the fence had forgotten existed. The change came gradually. Reyes lowered his head another inch, 1 forepaw sliding across the concrete as if he were closing in on a wounded teammate. Not prey. He tested the air above her open palm once, then again. The rumble in his chest softened. She didn't move, didn't touch, didn't reinforce. She simply stayed steady, aware, balanced, fluent. Vex widened his arc, circling behind her shoulder, tail rigid, breathing quick. He snapped a short bark, 1 sharp warning, and halted 3 feet away, head angled. She let out a slow breath. That was it. No spectacle, no drama, just a release of air that said everything. No fear, no tension masked as calm, just genuine regulation. Orion was the last to adjust. His posture stayed tight, tail stiff, but his focus slipped away from attack. His gaze flicked between the others. Something old and instinctive unfolded. A recalibration. Pack hierarchies were never fixed. They reset constantly. These animals were systems unto themselves, measuring posture, energy, rhythm, scent. She allowed the process. She didn't interrupt. Vex moved first. He stepped closer, ears still alert but no longer pinned. He approached from her left, sniffed her exposed forearm, then sat, not in submission but in alignment, as though deciding for himself. The spectators beyond the fence went nearly silent. Someone swore quietly. Another muttered, "That doesn't mean anything. Dogs do stuff like that." But uncertainty crept in. None of them had ever seen Vex sit for a stranger, especially not after deprivation, not after weeks of aggression conditioning. Then Orion advanced. Light and quick. He passed her, doubled back, stopped directly in front. The youngest, the one they'd written off as unpredictable. She turned her head aside again, offering space, exposing her neck. Orion dipped his head just once, weight shifting forward, tail lowering enough to soften the line. Then he sat 3 dogs, no leashes, no orders, no tools, no force. Just presence. Just a woman who hadn't raised her voice, hadn't struck, hadn't even blinked too hard, and now sat at the center of a quiet formation of what the handlers once labeled uncontrollable assets. She stood slowly. One smooth motion, no sudden changes. The dogs remained seated, calm, attentive. She turned toward the gate and met Commander Hawkins' stare through the chain link. Her voice stayed low. She didn't need to shout, "Open it!" Hawkins didn't move. Mercer was frozen. The padlock dangled, pointless. The authority in the yard had shifted, completely and without announcement, because the dogs had chosen. And none of them had chosen the men outside the fence. She didn't wait for permission. She stood there, composed, flanked by 3 animals who had just undone everything the handlers believed about control. No one outside spoke. No one touched the lock. So she turned back, knelt once more, and tapped her thigh. Reyes stood and approached. She unclipped the carabiner from his collar, held it loosely in her hand, then rose. She walked to the gate and lifted the latch from the inside, calmly, like she'd always known it wasn't secured on her side. The hinge groaned as it swung open. Vex and Orion stayed behind, seated, unmoving. Reyes followed her out. No command had been spoken. Across the yard, silence spread, the kind that settles when every man present knows he's just seen something he can't yet explain. Mercer looked shaken. Hawkins looked drained of color, then a voice, not hers. "Wait," said one of the quieter handlers. A technical officer named Lee Ward, mid-30s, observant. One of the few who hadn't laughed earlier. He squinted at her like he was reaching for a memory long buried. "Did you ever work with a dog named Titan?" he asked carefully. She stopped mid-step. Ward continued, slower now. "Back in Sangan, wasn't there a female handler attached to Task Group Black Anvil? They called her Echo 7, or something like that. She and her K-9 had stopped a triple trigger before it ever detonated. Saved the entire forward patrol. No one answered right away, but she didn't dispute it either." Mason glanced toward the dog, still seated calmly inside the enclosure. "That's why they follow you," he muttered. "You're not just a handler. You're that handler." One of the others looked at Calder, unsure. "I thought she was only assigned here on a temporary support slot." "She is," Calder snapped, though the sharpness in his voice fractured at the edge. "She's special warfare," Mason said slowly, the pieces clicking together, or was. Joint tasking, SOCOM rotation. Hayes took a small step back. "You're messing with us," she finally spoke. "No," she said quietly, "he's not." Mason scanned the group, then the pen, then her again. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because dogs don't care what you've done," she replied. "Only how you show up now." The silence stretched. Then Calder turned without a word and headed toward the admin hut, his posture rigid. She didn't follow. Instead, she returned to the bench where her Pelican case rested, sat down, unclipped the carabiner from her belt, and placed it beside her, not as a badge of honor, but as equipment. Maintained. Ready behind her, the enclosure stayed still. The dogs hadn't moved. And for the first time that day, no one on the team had anything left to add. By 1700, the yard had gone quiet again, but not the usual kind. Not the end-of-shift lull, not the murmur of turnover. This was the silence that comes after revelation. The kind that settles once something long known but never acknowledged has finally been spoken aloud. The call to command had already happened. She hadn't made it, neither had Chief Calder. It was Mason, the tech, who stepped away and contacted the regional oversight lead for the kennel program. Calmly, discreetly. No announcement. By 1800, two unmarked government vehicles rolled down the service lane. Out stepped Lieutenant Commander Elias Ward, Naval Special Warfare's Regional MWD Compliance Officer, along with a civilian from the Office of Military Veterinary Review. They didn't ask questions at first. They walked the perimeter, inspected the runs, opened logbooks, read feeding schedules aloud without commentary. One water bowl was empty. Two more had been dry for hours. The records showed dogs marked as fed while still flagged for secondary feeding. The civilian vet uncovered a shock collar, unauthorized for training use under NSW guidance since 2020, stuffed inside a handler's personal pack. No one claimed ownership. Then they reviewed the footage. Unknown to Calder, 1-yard camera, old, grainy, but functional, had partially captured the incident. No sound, but enough. 3 high-drive dogs released without leads into a confined space. A single person entering without protective gear. They watched as the dog circled. Watched as she lowered herself to a knee. Watched as the animals, one by one, sat. Commander Ward said nothing. He closed the laptop and looked at Calder. Who approved this? Calder didn't respond. Ward turned to the others. Was this part of a sanctioned training evolution? Silence until Mason cleared his throat. No, sir. It was presented as a tradition. The word lingered in the air, heavy and sour. Tradition. The civilian